Lena Morales pushed through the overgrown trail, her hiking boots crunching on 15 years of accumulated pine needles. The morning sun filtered through the canopy of Pine Ridge Forest, casting dappled shadows that danced with each breath of wind. She'd been walking this same route every weekend for 3 months now, searching for something, anything, that might lead her to answers about Mia. Her sister had been gone so long that most people had stopped asking about her. But Lena never stopped looking. The glint of metal caught her eye first, nestled against a moss-covered boulder just off the main trail. She almost dismissed it as another piece of discarded camping equipment, but something made her step closer. The shape was too familiar, too deliberate. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was an electric guitar, a Fender Stratocaster, cherry red beneath the dirt and moss that had claimed most of its surface. But it was the logo on the headstock that made her knees nearly buckle, the echoes painted in flowing script, exactly as she remembered from those summer nights when Mia would practice in the garage until their parents yelled at her to stop. With trembling hands, Lena brushed away years of forest debris. The guitar was impossibly well preserved, as if it had been placed here yesterday rather than abandoned 15 years ago. The strings were still taut, still gleaming silver in the morning light, and wrapped around the high E string, dried but somehow still fragrant, was a single red rose. Lena reached out to touch it, her fingertips barely grazing the flower when the impossible happened. A single perfect chord rang out through the forest, clear and resonant as if someone had just struck the strings with practiced precision. The sound hung in the air for a heartbeat longer than physics should have allowed, then faded into the whisper of wind through pine boughs. Lena spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. The trail stretched empty in both directions. No other hikers, no musicians, no explanation for what she just heard. But the guitar lay silent now, waiting. Summer 1999. The barn on the Morrison property had seen better decades. Paint peeled from its weathered siding, and the roof leaked in 3 places when it rained. But it was theirs, their sanctuary, their studio, their escape from the suffocating expectations of Pine Ridge High School. Mia sat behind her drum kit, sticks twirling between her fingers as she watched the argument unfold. Jake, their lead guitarist, held up a crumpled piece of paper covered in crossed-out lyrics. "This is garbage, Sarah. Complete garbage." He tossed the sheet toward their lead singer, who caught it with one hand while tuning her bass with the other. "Maybe if you actually listened to what I was trying to say, instead of just shredding over everything. What you're trying to say is pretentious crap about voices from the deep and echoes in the dark. We're a rock band, not some goth poetry club." Marcus, their rhythm guitarist, stepped between them. "Hey, maybe we should just stay out of it, Marcus." Sarah's voice carried the sharp edge that had been growing sharper all summer. "Just because you follow Jake around like a lost puppy doesn't mean you get a vote." That was when Mia had heard enough. She stood abruptly, her stool scraping against the wooden floor. "You know what? Figure it out yourselves." "Mia, come on." Tommy, their bassist, reached out as she pushed past him toward the barn door. "No, I'm done listening to this. You want to fight about stupid lyrics? Fine, but count me out." She paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the golden late afternoon light. "I'll be back by dusk. Maybe by then you'll remember why we started this band in the first place." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the hinges. For a moment, the remaining 4 members stood in uncomfortable silence. Then, Jake threw down his guitar pick. "Great, now what?" Sarah was already packing up her bass. "Now we call it a day. Maybe Mia's right. Maybe we need to remember why we're doing this." One by one, they filed out of the barn, leaving their instruments where they lay. None of them noticed the sheet music that had fluttered under Mia's drum kit when Jake threw it. None of them saw the words Sarah had scrawled at the bottom in her careful handwriting. "The voices are calling us home." Outside, Marcus was the first to spot it. Mia's favorite cymbal, the one she'd saved up 3 months of babysitting money to buy, lying in the dirt beside the barn. The brass was split clean down the middle, as if something had struck it with tremendous force. But Mia was nowhere to be seen, and the sun was already beginning to set. The Pine Ridge Police Department hadn't changed much in 15 years. The same beige walls, the same flickering fluorescent lights, the same smell of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. Lena sat across from Detective Ray Hoffman, who'd been a rookie when the echoes disappeared and was now the town's senior investigator. "I pulled everything we had," Hoffman said, sliding a manila folder across the scarred wooden desk. "But I gotta warn you, Lena, there's not much new here. We worked this case hard back in '99. Lena opened the folder with the reverence of someone handling ancient scripture. Crime scene photos spilled out first. The abandoned campsite. In Pine Ridge Forest, sleeping bags still zipped shut. A cold fire pit surrounded by 5 folding chairs. Personal effects cataloged and tagged. Wallets, car keys, a cooler full of spoiled food, but no sign of 5 teenagers. "The state police brought in bloodhounds," Hoffman continued. "Helicopters, search teams, volunteers. We combed every inch of that forest for weeks. It was like they just vanished." Lena studied each photograph carefully, looking for details that might have been missed, clues that time might have revealed. Most showed exactly what she expected: the detritus of interrupted lives, a camping trip cut short by something terrible. Then she found the anomaly. In the background of one photo, barely visible behind a cluster of pine trees, something metallic caught the light. Lena squinted, then pulled out her phone's flashlight app to illuminate the image better. "Ray," she said quietly. "What's that?" Hoffman leaned over to look where she was pointing. "What's what?" "That." She tapped the photo. "Behind those trees, it looks like... Son of a bitch." Hoffman grabbed the photo and held it closer to the light. "How did we miss that?" It was unmistakably a guitar, the same cherry red Fender Stratocaster that Lena had found that morning, planted upright in the forest floor like a gravestone. Even in the grainy crime scene photo, the Echoes logo was clearly visible on the headstock. "This was taken the day after they disappeared," Hoffman said, checking the date stamp. "July 15th, 1999. Lena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Ray, I need to tell you something. This morning I found that guitar." Hoffman's eyes snapped up to meet hers. "What?" "About 3 miles from the original campsite, just sitting there like someone had placed it deliberately." "That's impossible. We would have found it during the search." "Would you have?" Lena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "Look at this photo again. Really look at it." Hoffman studied the image for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "It's positioned perfectly to be visible from the campsite, like someone wanted it to be found, but only from the right angle. Or," Lena said quietly, "like someone wanted it to be photographed." 3 days before the disappearance, the recording setup in Jake's basement was cobbled together from garage sale finds and birthday money, an ancient 4-track recorder, mismatched microphones, and a mixing board that had seen better decades. But to the Echoes, it was Abbey Road Studios. "Okay, from the top," Jake called out, adjusting his headphones. "And Sarah, really lean into that harmony on the bridge. It's the best part of the song." Mia counted them in with her sticks. 1, 2, 3, 4, and they launched into Midnight Frequencies, the song Sarah had been working on for months. It was different from their usual material, darker and more atmospheric, built around a hypnotic bass line that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The lyrics had always made Jake uncomfortable. "In the static between stations, in the silence between notes, there are voices in the darkness, singing songs that no one wrote." But he had to admit Sarah's vocals soared over the instrumental in ways that gave him chills. When she hit the high notes on the chorus, it was like listening to something otherworldly. They ran through the song 3 times, each take better than the last. By the time they finished, the summer sun had set completely, leaving Jake's basement lit only by the glow of the recording equipment. "That's it," Sarah breathed, pulling off her headphones. "That's the one." Jake rewound the tape to listen to the playback. The song filled the small space, and for a moment, all 5 of them were silent, recognizing something special in what they'd created. "We should celebrate," Tommy suggested. "My parents are out of town. We could do a bonfire at their place. Roast some marshmallows, listen to the playback under the stars." "That sounds perfect," Mia said, already packing up her sticks. An hour later, they sat around a crackling fire pit in Tommy's backyard, passing the boom box between them and playing their demo tape over and over. Sarah had brought her lyric notebook and was reading aloud from new songs she'd been working on. Strange, beautiful verses about voices from the deep and echoes in the dark. "Where do you come up with this stuff?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Sarah shrugged, but there was something distant in her eyes. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the songs are already out there, waiting, like I'm just receiving them." The tape clicked as it reached the end of Midnight Frequencies. In the quiet moment before Jake reached over to flip it, they all heard it clearly, a voice that belonged to none of them, distant but unmistakable, whispering through the speakers. "Sing with us." The five teenagers looked at each other around the dying fire, the hair on their arms standing up despite the warm summer night. "Did you guys hear?" Mia started to ask, but Jake was already ejecting the tape, turning it over in his hands as if it might bite him. "Must be bleed-through from another recording. These old tapes pick up radio signals sometimes." Sarah reached for her notebook, scribbling something quickly in the margin. Later, when the police would find the notebook in her abandoned tent, that margin note would be the last thing she ever wrote. "They're calling us home." The Pine Ridge Diner hadn't changed its menu in 30 years, and Lena was grateful for the familiar comfort of burned coffee and questionable pie as she waited for her appointment. She'd spent the morning making calls to anyone who might remember something about the summer of 1999, and the responses had been surprisingly willing. Ray Hutchins, the retired forest ranger, slid into the booth across from her, right on time. His weathered face held the permanent squint of someone who'd spent decades scanning distant horizons. "Appreciate you reaching out," he said, declining Lena's offer to buy him lunch. "Don't get many folks asking about the old days anymore." "You told the police you heard music that night," Lena said, consulting her notes. "July 14th, around midnight." Ray nodded slowly. "Strange thing that. I was doing a final patrol before heading home. We had reports of teenagers partying in the forest. Figured I'd better check it out. But when I got to where the sound was coming from, there was no one there." "Oh, there were people there all right. That campsite had 5 tents, still had embers glowing in the fire pit. But the music," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "it wasn't coming from any radio or boombox I could see. Sounded like it was coming from the trees themselves. Multiple guitars, drums, voices harmonizing. Professional quality." Lena felt a chill despite the diner's overheated atmosphere. "What did you do?" "Called out to them, asked if everything was okay. The music stopped immediately, but no one answered. I figured they were just scared. Teenagers don't usually want to chat with rangers, you know. So I left them alone." "And the next morning?" Ray's expression darkened. "Next morning I went back to check on them. Found the campsite exactly like you saw in those police photos. Like they'd vanished into thin air." After Ray left, Lena drove across town to meet with Harold Voss, a man who'd contacted her through the defunct Finding the Echoes Facebook page she'd discovered. He lived in a cluttered ranch house filled with music memorabilia, vintage guitars, concert posters, boxes of vinyl records. "I've been collecting local band artifacts for 20 years, Harold explained, leading her through his makeshift museum. The Echoes were going to be something special. I could tell from their early demos. "You have their demos?" Harold's eyes lit up. "Not just demos. I have pieces of their actual equipment." He disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a familiar-looking effects pedal. "Found this at a pawn shop in the city about 5 years ago. Cost me a fortune, but it's definitely theirs." Lena examined the pedal, a vintage distortion unit, rusted and corroded, but still recognizable. Etched into the metal casing with what looked like a nail or knife was a single name: Jules. "Who's Jules?" Lena asked. Harold shrugged. "No idea. None of the band members were named Jules. I always figured it was someone's nickname, or maybe the name of a song they never got to record." "Where exactly did you find this?" "Murphy's Pawn on 5th Street. Owner said someone brought it in right after New Year's Day. 2,000. Needed quick cash. Didn't want to stick around to haggle over the price." Lena turned the pedal over in her hands, noting how the rust patterns seemed to form almost deliberate. shapes, like letters or symbols she couldn't quite decipher. Did the pawn shop owner describe who sold it? Said it was a young woman, maybe 18 or 19. Dark hair, nervous. Wouldn't give her name, just wanted cash fast. The description could have fit Sarah, the band's lead singer, but Sarah would have been reported missing months earlier. Unless, Harold, Lena said quietly, do you still have the receipt from when you bought this? The coordinates Harold had given her led to a part of Pine Ridge Forest that Lena had never explored, deeper into the wilderness than most hikers ventured. The trail, if it could be called that, was little more than deer paths and game runs, winding between massive old-growth pines that blocked out most of the afternoon sun. The pawn shop receipt had been more revealing than Harold realized. Tucked in his files, it contained not just the date and price, but a handwritten note from the shop owner. Customer left forwarding address in. Case item needed to be returned. Old Morrison Place, Pine Ridge Forest. Lena knew the Morrison Place, or knew of it. Every local kid had heard the stories about Old Man Morrison, the hermit who lived alone in the forest until he died sometime in the 1980s. His cabin had supposedly been abandoned ever since, slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. What she hadn't expected was how well-maintained the narrow trail still was, as if someone had been using it regularly. The cabin appeared, suddenly through a break in the trees, and Lena's first thought was that the stories had been wrong. This wasn't an abandoned ruin. The structure was solid, weather-beaten but intact, with a stone chimney that looked recently used. Someone had been living here, or at least visiting regularly. She approached cautiously, calling out a greeting that echoed unanswered through the trees. The front door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar as if inviting her inside. The interior was a time capsule of the late 1990s. Band posters covered the walls. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden. And in the center of the main room sat a makeshift recording studio that made Jake's basement setup look professional by comparison. But it was clearly functional. Cables ran between pieces of equipment, and everything was dust-free, recently used. On a wooden table near the window, Lena found them. A pair of drumsticks, worn smooth from use, with MM carved into the handles in Mia's distinctive script. Her sister had always been particular about her sticks, carving her initials so they wouldn't get mixed up with other drummers' equipment. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. Pinned to the wall above the recording equipment was a single sheet of paper covered in handwriting that made Lena's breath catch. It was Sarah's lyrics to Midnight Frequencies, but not the version she remembered from the police evidence. This was different, longer, with additional verses that seemed to continue, the song beyond its recorded ending. In the static between stations, in the silence between notes, there are voices in the darkness, singing songs that no one wrote. But if you listen close enough, past the fear and past the doubt, you can hear them calling softly, "Come and let your music out in the forest after midnight, where the moonlight never goes. There's a stage that's always waiting for the band that no one knows." The handwriting was definitely Sarah's, but it looked rushed, almost frantic. Some words were crossed out and rewritten, as if she'd been struggling to capture something specific. Lena photographed the lyric sheet with her phone, then continued exploring the cabin. In what must have been a bedroom, she found more evidence of recent habitation: a sleeping bag, empty food containers, a battery-powered radio tuned to a static-filled frequency. But it was the sound from beneath the floorboards that made her freeze. It started as a faint scratching, like mice or squirrels moving around in the crawl space. But the rhythm was too deliberate, too purposeful. It sounded almost like Morse code. Lena knelt on the wooden floor, pressing her ear to the boards. The scratching continued, starting and stopping in patterns that seemed to spell out letters. She grabbed her phone and opened a Morse code app, trying to translate the sounds. SINGWITHUS. The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving the cabin in absolute silence. Lena remained motionless, hardly daring to breathe, when she noticed something else. A section of floorboard near the wall that didn't quite line up with the others, as if it had been removed and replaced. She worked her fingers under the loose board and lifted it carefully. The space beneath was shallow, just deep enough to hide a few items from casual discovery. But what she found made her heart race. Pressed into the soft earth underneath the cabin was a handprint. Small, delicate, definitely female. But it wasn't the age of the print that terrified her. It was how fresh it looked, as if someone had pressed their hand into the dirt just hours ago. And nestled beside the handprint, wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from moisture, was a cassette tape labeled in Sarah's careful handwriting, The Echoes Final Recording, July 14th, 1999. Lena's hands shook as she unwrapped the cassette tape. The plastic bag had protected it perfectly. The label was still legible. The tape itself showed no signs of age or damage. It was as if it had been placed under the floorboards yesterday. The battery-powered radio in the cabin had a tape deck, old but functional. Lena inserted the cassette with the reverence of an archaeologist handling a priceless artifact. This was it, the final recording of the echoes, made on the last night anyone saw them alive. Static filled the small cabin as the tape began to play, then cleared to reveal the familiar opening notes of midnight frequencies. But this wasn't the version she'd heard before. This recording was different, richer, more complex, with additional instrumental layers that seemed to weave in and out of the main melody like conversations in a foreign language. Sarah's voice soared over the music, but her lyrics had evolved far beyond what Lena remembered. In the static between stations, in the silence between notes, there are voices in the darkness, singing songs that no one wrote. They've been waiting in the forest, since before the town was, here for musicians brave enough to make their ancient music clear. The song continued for nearly 8 minutes, building to a crescendo that made the hair on Lena's arm stand up. But it was what came after the music ended that made her blood run cold. Through the fading instrumental, she could hear voices, the band members talking, laughing, completely unaware that the tape was still recording. "Did you guys feel that?" Mia's voice, distant but clear. "Feel what?" Jake responded. "During the bridge. It was like someone else was playing with us." "I felt it too," Sarah said quietly. "Like there were more voices in the harmony than just ours." A longer pause filled with the ambient sounds of the forest at night. Crickets, wind through trees, the distant call of an owl. Then Sarah's voice again, but different now, strained. "Guys, I think someone's watching us." "What do you mean?" Tommy asked. "From the trees. There are people in the trees." The sound of movement, chairs scraping, nervous laughter. "Sarah, there's nobody there," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, listen. Can't you hear them singing?" And then, barely audible through the recording, Lena heard it. Voices harmonizing with no visible source, a melody that seemed to come from the forest itself. "We should go," Mia said, her voice tight with sudden fear. "Something's wrong here." "Wait," Sarah interrupted. "They're not trying to hurt us. They want us to sing with them." "Sarah, no." But Sarah's voice was already joining the phantom harmony, her clear soprano weaving into the supernatural chorus. One by one, the other band members' voices joined in, until all 5 were singing along with something that shouldn't have existed. The melody was beautiful and terrible, familiar yet alien, like a half-remembered lullaby from a nightmare. Then abruptly, Sarah's voice broke from the harmony. "Help me! Something's wrong. I can't stop singing." "Sarah," Mia shouted. But it was another voice that answered, speaking directly into the microphone with crystal clarity. "We will help. We will take care of you. Forever." The tape snapped off in Lena's hand, the plastic ribbon tangling around her fingers like grasping vines. Dawn broke gray and cold as Lena emerged from the Morrison cabin. The broken cassette tape clutched in her fist, and Sarah's lyric sheet folded carefully in her jacket pocket. She'd spent the night in the cabin, afraid to leave in the darkness, afraid of what might be waiting in the forest shadows. But the morning light revealed only empty trails and silent trees. Her phone had no signal in the deep woods, so she couldn't call Detective Hoffman until she reached the main trail. When she finally got through, her words tumbled out in a rush. The cabin, the equipment, the tape, the handprint under the floorboards that was still damp with forest moisture. "I'm sending a team out there right now," Hoffman said. "Don't go back there alone, Lena. Promise me." She promised, but her fingers were already composing a text message to the one person who might have answers. Tommy Martinez, the only surviving member of the Echoes, who'd moved to Seattle after graduation and hadn't returned to Pine Ridge in 15 years. The message was simple. Found your final recording. We need to talk. She hit send and waited, no reply. An hour later, she was back at her car when she noticed something that made her stop dead in her tracks. Carved into the bark of a massive pine tree, at exactly eye level, were fresh marks, letters cut deep enough to reveal the white wood beneath the bark. The carving was in the same flowing script as the Echo's logo, and the message was unmistakable. Encore. Below the word, someone had carved a date, today's date, and below that, a time, 11:47 p.m. Lena checked her watch. It was barely 8 a.m. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She looked down, expecting to see Tommy's response to her message. Instead, the number was listed as unknown, and the message contained only 5 words. The show must go on. As Lena stared at the screen, another message appeared from the same unknown number. This time, it was a photo. An image of 5 figures standing on what looked like a makeshift stage in a forest clearing, instruments in hand, faces obscured by shadow and stage lights that seemed to glow with their own supernatural radiance. But it was the timestamp on the photo that made Lena's blood freeze. It was dated tomorrow. The phone rang in her hand. Unknown number. Against every instinct screaming at her not to answer, Lena swiped to accept the call. "Hello, Lena," said a voice she hadn't heard in 15 years, her sister Mia's voice, unchanged by time. "We've been waiting for you to find us. Tonight, you'll understand everything. The forest remembers every song that's ever been played here, and some songs never end." The line went dead, leaving Lena alone on the forest trail with nothing but the sound of wind through the pines and the terrible certainty that her search for the Echoes was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.